I'm Jana Wong Healy, and I've been a film industry professional for years. Worked in development, production, and distribution for a variety of film studios and companies. I currently teach business communication at the University of Southern California's Marshall School of Business. I'm here with Stephen Gundel, a professor of film and television studies at the University of Warwick in the UK, a film historian and an expert on Italian cinema. His latest book, Fame Amid the Ruins, Italian Film Stardom in the Age of Neorealism, is now published and available for purchase. Today, we're talking about the financial success of Dino's films. In other words, box office grosses. So, Stephen, because Hollywood tends to equate success with big box office dollars, what would you say are Dino's most successful films in terms of box office gate?
Well, I think first of all, we should say that Dino is known for some spectacular successes, but also for some flops. What is interesting, if you look at the balance, is that the flops actually didn't lose that much money, whereas the big successes made a lot. And if we look at the figures and try to work out which was his most successful film of all, then I think we have to conclude that it was Hannibal. Hannibal, which was made in 2001, which made a profit of $262 million. So that's to say it made $351 million at the box office, but had a budget of $87 million. And that is Dino's most successful film in box office terms. If we look at what follows that, then the next one is probably the film we might have expected to find in first place. That's to say King Kong from 1976. And that made, depending on which figures you're looking at, between $52 and $65 million profit. And that is then followed by Conan the Barbarian, by Death Wish, and by Serpico. Now, all of these films made substantially more than their budgets and are really, if you like, Dino's biggest hits.
I remember reading an interview with Dino around the time King Kong was released, in which he championed the importance of opening weekend box office grosses. Did the release pattern of his American films show a concern for this, do you think? Was it mostly Dino, maybe, or the studio that was pushing for these large opening weekends?
I think if we're going to answer this question, we need to look at Dino's approach to film promotion. We need to look at the relationship he had with studios, because many of the films were made in conjunction with studios, of course. And we also need to look at the moment as well. Now, Dino was a great showman. He liked to be out there up front, promoting his films. He was a personality. He wasn't a producer who was in the background. So he was often out there giving interviews, drumming up business for his films. And of course, King Kong is the classic example of that, where he was everywhere across the press and television to make sure that this blockbuster didn't fail. The studios, of course, were understanding in the 70s in particular the importance of the opening weekend. That seems to be when this phenomenon, which is very much a part of the movie business today, takes off. And the reason why the opening weekend became so important was not so much, it's often said, because of the blockbuster phenomenon. That's to say, studios were investing massive amounts of money in films that, really could not afford to be left to their own devices. They need to be promoted heavily so the money was earned back quickly. But to the multiplex phenomenon, that's to say, the way in which people were going to the cinema, experiencing cinema, was changing, and the spaces for cinema too. And these things came together in the same moment to make the phenomenon of the opening weekend significant. The first film that is regarded as important in this respect was Jaws. And King Kong, of course, is a film that takes some inspiration from Jaws, not so much in its thematic content, but in its scale. And Dino De Laurentiis is remembered, one of his memorable quotes for saying, at the end of King Kong, you'll cry. At the end of Jaws, you didn't. When the monkey dies, there will be tears. Right? So the idea was that King Kong was Jaws, with emotion, if you like. You get bound up with, you care for the creature. So I think Dino didn't pioneer, he didn't invent the opening weekend, but he immediately understood its importance. And I think we can see that even when in the early 80s he opened his food stores in New York and Los Angeles, the opening of the New York DDL food show in 1982, which was on Thanksgiving weekend, was open with all the fanfare of a movie premiere. With thousands of people waiting outside to get into the store to experience it, and so on. So we can see him applying his practice, and the opening weekend was something that he embraced with vigor.
It seems like he really liked these big budget spectacles. And so do you think he was attracted to them because they were spectacles or because they could bring in big box office?
I think if we look back at his career, we can see that there are different themes. He doesn't mind making small films. He doesn't mind making films with artistic directors, but the vocation for making blockbusters is established very early, I would say, in his Italian phase, when he was making Ulysses or in the beginning, the Bible film directed by John Huston. We can see an interest in scale. Now, scale means films that are long, that are big budget, have great directors, star-filled casts, and all of this investment in scale, I think, was something that became Dino's hallmark. I mean, he was seen as a sort of Napoleon of the film industry in Italy, especially when he established his own studio complex known as Dino Città. Now, if you're going to invest big, then you've really got to make sure you get your return. And I think Dino's interest in movie promotion, I mean, we don't see that so markedly, I think, in his early Italian phase, but in the American phase, it becomes, very strong. He understands what this is about, and he's associated in the public mind, I would say. It's not an entirely accurate image, but he is bound up with the idea of the blockbuster.
Do you think that he had more blockbusters films in the United States because he had learned how to market his movies after moving to the United States, or do you think it was because the U.S. film market was more accepting of big blockbusters over the Italian cinema?
I mean, he left Italy for various reasons. I think, he felt that the government was not allowing him the sort of freedom of operation that he wanted to. He clearly, by the 1970s, had an idea of himself as an international film producer. And, in the mind of a man from Naples, the United States, that's the home of the film industry. It's the home of sort of the large scale enterprise. And if he thought, well, Italy's too small, I'm constrained, where can I expand and fulfill my ambitions, my potential? Nowhere but the United States. And therefore, of course, having arrived there, immediately he started to think on a grand scale. But we should say that some of his earliest American films, which were successful, weren't actually blockbusters of the King Kong type. I mean, in fact, in the very year of Jaws, which was 1975. I mean, the number 6 in the box office was 3 Days of Condor, which was a Dino De Laurentiis film. So, he knew that it wasn't always the blockbuster that would bring home the dollars. I mean, films like Death Wish or Serpico are not blockbusters, but were hugely successful. So I think he had a range of formulas, and always had an eye for something. He was a voracious reader, always looking for a bestseller that could be adapted, or a comic book hero that could be taken to the screen. I think he had a great understanding of the different articulations of popular culture, be it in popular literature, comic books, popular film history, in the case of King Kong, and how that could be drawn on to propose ideas that would work in the present.
Every film producer, every studio has had its flops. I mean, even George Lucas made Howard the Duck, for example. Did Dino have many flops, and did they affect his ability to produce films as his career moved forward?
I think he certainly had setbacks. We've talked in the past about some of them. There are flops which are remembered as having been flops. I would say Dune is one of them. David Lynch's Dune. Flash Gordon is another. But neither of these films, which are probably the ones that sort of come to mind first, actually lost a great deal of money. I mean, Dune is reckoned to have lost about $5 million. Flash Gordon in the end broke even. And had it not been for difficulties with the actor playing the part of Flash Gordon, there would have been a sequel to that as well. So I think, although sort of Dino is remembered as a producer who had his highs and his lows, ultimately the losses were really contained, and he was always able to spring back from setbacks. I think very few producers have had careers that have lasted 6 decades like Dino De Laurentiis. And you don't last that long without having resilience and resources and formulas that you can deploy. I think he was always pretty strict on questions of budgets, even when you had a large budget. He knew where the money needed to be invested, and where it needed to be saved too. And you had to see the money on screen. There's no point in spending money which you then don't see. So I think we can describe him as a producer who I think should be remembered for his successes, and not for the few flops, even though they're ones that are quite prominent, let's say, in the history of the film industry.
Do you think Dino was very concerned about the box office grosses of his films? I mean, it didn't seem like he was overly concerned with the artistic films he made, in Italy. But you come to Big Bad America, where everything is about dollars and cents. Do you think that changed his attitude about trying to make movies that would then make money?
It's an interesting question. I think there can't have been a movie producer who wasn't interested in the bottom line. But there are different ways of being interested in it and different ways of assessing financial success. I mean, in his early days in Italy, when he was working for Lux Film, or after that together with Carlo Ponti, they had a strategy where they would make popular films, with popular comedians on low budgets that would make money, that would then allow them to invest in more artistic films, or the projects of directors whose artistry they admired. Now, with an artist director, you can never guarantee that there will be a success, because they might go off on a tangent, or pursue some sort of personal idiosyncratic itinerary. You're not working in terms of formulas or genres, or and not always even with sort of stars, although very often the insertion of stars in the projects of art directors was the way in which you tried to guarantee that they would have some box office appeal. But it was a much more risky sort of operation that had to be sustained by constant investment in smaller scale, guaranteed successes. Now, when we come to Dino's American career, I think we can say we remember the big films, but there are also a lot of bread and butter films as well. And I think that carries over from this early experience, that if you're producing a large number of films, you want to make sure that you've got a bedrock of films which are not going to sort of be earth-shattering in any respect, but which are going to constantly make some money. And that will, if you like, provide a platform from which you can make the larger films. Now, the blockbuster has to succeed. The investment is such, in every respect, in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of scale. They must succeed, and when they don't, it's disastrous. But there are other ways of making money. I mean, Death Wish is a case in point. Not a big budget film by any standard, but one which touched a nerve, which somehow spoke to a previously perhaps unarticulated public mood, and did very well indeed. So I think with Dino we can see sort of formulas, we can see patterns that are operating over time, but they certainly change according to context. And certainly in the United States, to repeat the point, I mean, it's there that we see the large-scale filmmaking really sort of flourish in his curriculum for the first time.
What do you think he enjoyed doing more? The big blockbuster, or the smaller scale story that had more to do with character and plot?
It's an interesting question, isn't it? And it's sort of, you almost want to say, oh no, it's the small scale films that he loved best. But the fact of the matter is that as a producer, he was far less involved with the small scale films or with the art films. He would rarely visit the set even with films like that. Certainly with the art films, if he was making a film with Fellini, he'd let Fellini get on with it. His role was really to provide the means for the director to make the film. With the spectacle, the producer is hands-on and out front. The producer is much more important than the director in many cases. And I think we can see, when you look at interviews with Dino, several of which are on YouTube, for example, I mean, you can see his enthusiasm when he's talking about spectacles. They are producer films, and he seems to enjoy those much more. I mean, there's an extraordinary tension, risk in those moments, but he seems to be in his element. But having said that, the story was always important for Dino. The story is the star, he even said at one point. And this voracious reading of bestsellers, of novels, looking for material to adapt, having writers on call and so on. There's really a sort of a pre-work, shall we say, a preparation, a search for inspiration, for ideas that is also very important to Dino. He likes to be out there. He's a man who's incredibly active, who likes to be sort of doing things, involved in every key decision in the production of a big film. But there's also that other dimension, which is much more sort of reflective and quiet, much less visible, but nonetheless is an absolutely vital element of his career as a producer.
Well, thank you. This was very enlightening. I love hearing about his marketing skills. I love seeing his big spectacle films. And I loved reading about him, particularly when he was out there promoting King Kong. It, it, it was really, really fun to see this man trying to sell this movie and doing such a great job doing it. I loved that.
Well, I think I would recommend that people go and have a look at some of those interviews on YouTube, because you get a feel of Dino De Laurentiis. I won't say at his best, because it's the visible, it's the the dimension of promotion, but it's a way to get a real sense of the man and his passions.
Thank you, Stephen. We will catch up again with you next time.
Thank you, Jana.